Guide to Buying Your First Mountain Bike with Emma Marinin, professional endurance mountain biker. Hey, I get asked over and over some version of, hey Emma, I'd really like to get into mountain biking and I'm ready to buy a mountain bike. What should I buy? And I've given my spiel so many times, I thought I would put it in a video so it was available for everybody. I am going to share with you what I think is a really appropriate bike for a novice biker, or novice mountain biker, not necessarily a novice biker, who wants to get into the sport, wants to have a lot of fun, wants to do, the things that most mountain bikers want to do, ride trails, hang out with friends, have a great time, and then hopefully become really passionate about the sport and then be set up to buy their dream bike after their first bike. So maybe that's the very first thing I should say, is I don't think your very first mountain bike should be your dream bike. I don't think you should go out and spend a ton of money on a top-end bike because you may not end up ultimately liking mountain biking. I can't fathom that, but maybe. And honestly, when you first learn to ride mountain bikes, you don't really know what type of mountain biking you're going to be into. You might end up being really into gravity riding and you never thought that, or you might really be someone who likes doing really long rides to get to some really pristine and remote areas. You just won't necessarily know that. Your first mountain bike should be a hardy, do-it-all sort of bike. Kind of a good middle-of-the-road bike is what I think is what you want to look for. It'll be capable to do anything you want to do as a new mountain biker. Second, when you learn to ride mountain bikes, you're going to put the bike in the dirt a lot. You're going to bump it into trees. You're probably going to tow it to trailheads in not the most friendly ways. The bike's gonna get hammered. So learn on a bike that can tolerate being hammered on, which is generally a pretty good, solid, middle-of-the-road bike. So here we go. Okay, so I'm going to share with you about my Pivot Trail 429 as what I would consider a really friendly bike for a new mountain biker. Not necessarily this level of component build, but this type of bike is really an excellent bike. It's what's called a trail bike, not a cross-country bike, not a downhill bike, a bike that is very capable on all terrain. It's not going to be the fastest climbing bike ever. A cross-country bike is built to be incredibly fast uphill, but it takes a lot of specific and precise bike handling to ride it down more technical terrain. A downhill bike is going to absorb everything that the trail throws at it and be super confidence-inducing that way, but they're total pigs. They're not a lot of fun to pedal, particularly not uphill, and walking your bike, it happens a bit, but you really don't want to set yourself out as a new mountain biker to be walking up every single hill. That's pretty demoralizing. It's unlikely that you're going to end up absolutely loving the sport. So look for a bike that the frame type says that it's something like a trail bike or an all-mountain bike. That's kind of that middle zone, a very capable bike, both climbing and both descending, aka ultimate fun. You want a full suspension trail bike. First off, if you really want to get into mountain biking, if you want to have fun, if you want to have a positive experience, oh, hello, Elder Cat, came to say hi. He's an expert on bikes. Hi, Elder. Elder agrees with me. You should definitely be looking at a full suspension bike. Why? Because they're more friendly and forgiving when you make errors, and they're a whole lot more comfortable for being on a bike for a long time. Look for 120 to 140 millimeters of travel. How much travel do you want? Not too little, not too much. Somewhere in the mid-zone. Again, if you have a low travel bike, like a cross-country bike, you're going to be looking at travel around 100 millimeters of travel. that's just a really sharp ride and requires a lot of input from the rider. Conversely, on the downhill end, you're going to be looking at, 160, 180, oh my gosh, even more travel than that now, bikes, front forks that look like castles on the front. Really, it's like a motorcycle without a motor. Those bikes have that much suspension, it's really heavy and inefficient to pedal, and so it's not going to be a fun bike to actually pedal. Super fun to descend on, but not a fun bike to pedal on. So I would look for a bike that's got travel somewhere in the 120 to 140 range is kind of the sweet spot.
Bike geometry, aggressive versus slacker.
When people are talking about the geometry of a bike, when they're talking about an aggressive geometry, that's what you want for more of a cross-country rider, for a really nimble climbing bike. The more slacker the geometry, the more downhill focused the bike is. So those are just kind of some terms to hear when you start to do some research about the frames. So quick review, full suspension. You want to like mountain biking, invest in full suspension. Look for a bike that is kind of in the middle of capabilities. That's usually going to be a trail bike or an all mountain bike. And look for travel somewhere around 120 to 140 is going to be your sweet spot.
Does wheel size matter?
The next questions I get all the time when people are starting to look at new mountain bikes are the age-old question of, what size wheels do I want? Mountain bikes have gone through a ton of development over the last few years, and we used to all be on 26-inch bikes, then we were all on 29, and then we were somewhere in the middle with the 27 and a half. And all of those bikes did ride really differently. The 26-inch wheel style has really gone out of fashion, except for in the most downhill bikes. And most bike companies are moving away from 27.5, and they've just been adopting 29-inch. So you're going to see a lot more 29-inch wheel bikes, and you're going to have a much easier time finding components, tires, all those sorts of things for a 29-inch wheel bike. But what's the real difference? Honestly, the ways the bikes have been built now for a new mountain biker, you are not going to be able to tell the difference. One thing I hear all the time from particularly smaller riders, women riders, which is me, right? I'm actually pretty darn petite. Is, oh my gosh, I'm too little for 29-inch wheels. Phooey. If you are a smaller rider, just make sure that you can swing your leg over the bike and stand over it. It's really confidence if you can actually put your feet on both sides of the bike. That's the only consideration I would look for as a smaller rider when you're looking at 29 or 27-inch tires.
What about carbon fiber?
Another question that gets asked me all the time is, ooh, I hear carbon is the thing. Carbon is amazing. Don't get me wrong. All of my bikes are carbon bikes. All of my wheel sets are carbon wheel sets. But I would not look for that as a new mountain biker. Particularly alloy wheels, man, they hold up so well. And if you do ding them, bash them into things, they become untrue. It's so easy to true them and have a bike shop do it. It'll cost you $5–10 to have your wheel retrued, and you'll be out on the trails instantly. Whereas if you have a problem with your carbon wheels, like you break a spoke, typically they have to entirely take the wheel apart just to replace the spoke. And you can ding an aluminum or an alloy rim and it does great. That doesn't happen with carbon wheels. Granted, they're really difficult to break, but if you break a carbon wheel, it's done. So especially because you're going to be learning, you're going to be bashing into things, don't spend your money on carbon wheels. Same with the frame. It's starting to get harder and harder to find frames that aren't carbon fiber, but I would not shy away from an alloy or an aluminum frame as a new mountain biker. Again, they're just going to be very robust to abuse. But I wouldn't be so freaked out on the frame, but honestly, like the ride feel of a good aluminum frame is so nice. So I would not shy away from that when it comes to frame material. So, tires, 27.5, 29-inch, don't even fret about it. When you find a bike that meets your specs and it feels good, who cares what size wheels it's got? Honestly, you won't have a solid opinion about it until you've been riding bikes for a while. And then I would definitely err towards more alloy wheels and aluminum frames as opposed to going for a carbon bike. You won't appreciate the difference as a novice rider, and it just adds a lot to that price point.
What about components?
We've got the bike figured out. We know how much suspension we want. We know the material we want. Now we want to think about what sort of build our bike has. That just means what components are on the bike, what the drivetrain is. I ride for Shimano. I love their components. They are amazing. But honestly, SRAM and Shimano both make excellent group sets. I wouldn't be picky as a new rider. What I would be picky about is, again, seeing if you can find a bike that's got group sets that are kind of in the mid-range. Why I would send you towards the mid-range is because the really high end, it's incredibly light, but for that lightness, it's incredibly expensive, and those components are, because they are so light and every little millimeter is shaved off of them, they're more susceptible to damage when you wreck the bike. Oftentimes, a lot of bikes will have a slightly upgraded rear derailleur on the bike, and that piece is pretty bomber in all things. So if you do end up with a component that is above kind of, or is in that top grade, I think it's okay if it's your rear derailleur, but I would stay away from it for all the rest of your group sets, something nice and in the middle. Why I would avoid the low end is because once you get really to that very entry level, those components generally aren't as hardy, and so they tend to need to be replaced more often, and they tend to require a lot more mechanical care. So if you do love tinkering with your bike and you want to be adjusting your derailleur all the time, you might be totally fine with an entry-level group set on your bike. But for most riders, the idea of having to adjust your derailleur, reset your brakes all the time is going to be way more than what you really want to do, and it'll inhibit you from getting out and actually just jumping on your bike whenever you've got a few hours free in the afternoon or on the weekends. So I would urge you towards a middle group set for that reason.
Don't mess around, get disc brakes.
Some other things I would definitely think about when I'm looking at a new bike. I don't even feel like I should have to say this, but you want disc brakes. These things are awesome. They brake so well. Bikers have opinions about everything, for any single component, bike thing. For there's somebody who absolutely thinks it's the best thing ever, there's somebody who thinks it's the worst thing ever. But the one thing I have never heard a cyclist complain about is that their bike brakes too well. Never, ever, ever. As a new rider, you want confidence to know you can stop your bike if something comes up that's scary that you don't want to ride. So having great braking ability, absolute must. Get disc brakes. Don't mess around.
One-by drivetrains are simple, and that is a good thing.
Other things that I think are important to kind of look at if you have the option is I would go for what's called a one-by drivetrain. And this means you don't have a front derailleur. It means that you only have one shifter, and that's just for the rear cassette. Why I think that's so great is because when you're learning to mountain bike, things on the trail are going to be coming at you really fast, and you just want the simplicity of shifting up or shifting down, not having to deal with the complexity of which front chainring do I want to be in, which back gears, because the shifting happens so fast because of all the terrain that's being thrown at you. So look for a one-by drivetrain if you have the option. If the perfect bike for you shows up and it's a two-by, you'll be okay. But most mountain bikes are moving away from a two-by, or I haven't even heard of a three-by mountain bike built in a really long time. I'm sure they're out there though. but I think you'll be really happy if you can find a 1x drivetrain.
Get a dropper seat post. Seriously.
A few other things I think are really great when you are looking for your first mountain bike is a dropper seat post. This makes descending so lovely. It makes sure you're always in the right position, particularly as a small rider. You can't get behind the saddle. You're just too small. And so being able to get the saddle out of the way, really important. It's really hard to find a mountain bike that's come out in the last few years that doesn't come stock with a dropper seat post on it. But if the bike you find that's the right bike for you doesn't have one, I would set aside some money for a dropper seat post.
Tips before you go bike shopping.
Some final thoughts about buying your first mountain bike. I really think it is smart to look at a used bike for your first bike. You will be able to buy a lot more bike for your money, especially if the bike only has a handful of seasons on it. When you start looking for a used bike, make sure you have a good bike shop that knows that when you find a bike you're really interested in, that you're going to swing it by, and have them give it a really quick look over. They can just make sure that there's not excessive wear and tear, there's no components that you're going to have to immediately replace, there hasn't been some crazy abuse done to the bike. It'll just save you a lot of hassle down the road. So finally, a little quick review. When you're getting ready to get into mountain biking and you're ready to buy your first mountain bike, I really recommend getting a bike that is just kind of smack in the middle of everything. Middle of travel, middle of ride style, middle of group set. All of those things will make it so it's a very capable bike that is both really fun to go uphill on, really fun to go downhill on. It'll be an excellent bike to learn how to mountain bike, learn all the mountain bike skills, and get out and explore some really cool trails. So good luck on your journey, and as always, if you have any questions, don't be shy and ask me some questions. I'm always here to help. Happy riding.